Hi, Matt.
Hey Graham, good to see you.
Good to see you. We're talking today about what we think of as some pretty poor advice, some silly advice that couples counselors like us over the years might have given to the couples that we've worked with.
Oh, maybe you, Graham, but not me.
Yeah, come on. Be one of the competencies of a really good therapist is humility, Matt. Are you
Ah, yeah,
honestly
you
saying?
got me.
We're going to talk about some things that we have certainly read in some books, let's put it that way, that couples counselors say to the couples that they're working with. I think fundamentally, a lot of them we disagree with, right? I think it's fair
Yeah,
to
I
be
think we
upfront
do.
with.
Yeah, I think we do, don't we? I mean, some of it I think is well-intended advice, right? I don't think anyone means any harm, but I think some of the examples we'll talk about in a minute or two, they seem naive at best, don't they?
Yeah, and maybe there's a split there between the Americanization of the therapy world and kind of how that translates to a British audience as well that we'll tease out. We might have disagreed on some of the
Yeah,
examples that
yeah,
we're talking about, but
yeah,
some of them feel a little bit hackneyed, a little bit artificial as well. And I
yeah.
think that can put a lot of people off, maybe particularly men
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, I think so.
Less.
I think so. Yeah, I think there's I think that's probably true. Quite a few of the couples I work with, women as well, would just be uncomfortable with some of the examples we were talking about. I mean, we should probably get into them, shouldn't we? The kind of things that we
Yeah,
that we have in mind, the things that we've heard, the things that couples sometimes play back to us that other therapists have said or things they've read about.
let's put
I'm
a
thinking
few.
things like staring into one another's eyes. You've come across that, the idea that we'd increase our intimacy and our emotional connection by sitting quietly and for a concentrated period of time doing nothing but staring into one another's eyes feels, I
Yeah,
don't know.
which inherently feels to me like the most awkward thing I could possibly do with another human being, and sounds horrendous. But what's the thinking behind that idea, really?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't give a great deal of credence. So, I mean, something like, the eyes are the window into the soul in poetic language, isn't it? And then there is a little there is a study about people doing it, but and that increasing sense of connection. So, lots of there's quite a lot of mileage off the back of that study. It's a tiny study, to be honest. I think
Exactly.
24 pairs, so it's small scale. It seems to increase something in the short term. Whether it does over the long term, that hasn't been studied. There are some links to eye contact releasing oxytocin, and you see a little bit of that in mother and baby studies. But again, in terms of adult couples, whether it is actually the eye contact or whether it's proximity, or in that first study that I was just mentioning, they're talking to one another and asking one another questions and responding as well. So disaggregating like exactly what's going on there, I think is difficult. But my objection to it is the same as yours. I just think it's kind of goofy and awkward and odd. And some of the couples I see who are doing, important work in the world, who've got big jobs and busy lives, it just I couldn't offer it up to them as a
Hmm.
suggestion with a straight face.
Let's If I was to play devil's advocate, I'd say that the outcome that you're trying to work towards is something like broadening compassion, broadening empathy, right? That couples that get locked in really difficult situations and places in their relationships are often where they go into themselves and start to resent their partner, start to forget about the good things that they love about their partner.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
what an exercise like staring into each other's eyes is trying to cultivate is that reconnection with the other person, that sense of seeing them as a human being. It makes me think of, I don't know if you've seen that art exhibition by or art installation by Maria Abramovich, where she sits at a table and invites people in the exhibition space to come and sit opposite her, and
right,
literally
yeah,
they just stare at each other for minutes at a time. And people find
yeah,
that genuinely quite
yeah,
moving
yeah, yeah.
and quite connecting to and quite intimate, I imagine. But I think what we're saying is that that's a one-off example in a one-off period of time, that whether that
Yeah.
actually means that those two people across the table are going to feel connected to each other over
Yeah.
decades,
It
I
feels like a
think it's
phase. That's a
unlikely.
nice example. It feels like a phase of life as well. It feels like, have you been in those relationships where there's a real intensity to them, and you're kind of really absorbed by somebody? I've definitely known those feelings over the years, those relationships haven't worked out. They're not the people I wish I was married to this day, you know. So, I mean, I think there are, like, you do get peak feelings, don't you? Love is a kind of, it does send you a bit crazy, you know, hence the title of this podcast. But whether you want that week after week, month after month, and if you're in a longer relationship year after year, that seems to me, when I meet couples, they're often feeling quite lonely or disconnected in the relationship. They might be full of resentment or anger at the other person. And the idea that doing something like that, or, you know, one of the other suggestions that I heard in the recent past was take a dance class together. You know, it's a nice idea. I could see some couples making something of that, but probably not at the point at which you're mad as hell with one another or feeling really lonely and let down.
Yeah, just to finish maybe on the staring into each other's eyes, it's such an artificial thing, and often it's a signal that we should avoid another person. If their eye contact is too prolonged, too intense, it's a sign that they're not quite reacting to social signals from the other person. It's just all of it feels a little bit too artificial and weird to me to recommend to
Yeah.
someone.
No, I agree. And you know, some of the other examples that we were gathering up for this conversation, things like a sort of second honeymoon or weekends away, those are not inherently bad ideas, but they are artificial again, aren't they? So if it goes well, that second honeymoon or weekend away, like what have you learned? Like, the situation is often so separate from everyday life. If you've got kids, you're probably there without the kids. If you're trying to rekindle a romance, you've probably put a few quid to it. So it's probably an upscale, you know, it's a nice thing. And what does that really tell you about the day to day? What it's going to be like again when you get back on Tuesday morning? I think that's part of my problem with those sort of ideas. Even if they work, do they really work? And quite often they feel like pressure, don't they? The eye contact feels a bit like pressure to me, and so does a second honeymoon or weekend away. It's like, wow, you haven't, maybe a lot of couples I see haven't had sex, for example, for a long while with one another. You're going to be sharing the same bed on a weekend away. There's quite a level of expectation building. That in itself is not always helpful.
The more you're talking about it, the more it feels sometimes that counselors and the couples themselves are reaching for practical levers to pull to try and have quite transformational impacts. Like, do this one exercise and things will massively improve in your relationship. A lot of what we talk about are those day-to-day practices of trying to improve things.
Yeah, it's habits, isn't it? I think,
Yeah.
you know, that's like we talk about this elsewhere, don't we? And in a book we wrote, we talk a bit about habits and how you change things typically relatively slowly over time, sometimes by just repeating things, grinding things out, you know, that kind of I suppose the idea of atomic habits, you know, that they're teeny tiny like atoms, but also they have like power within them if you keep doing them. So rather than those one-offs or those things which feel a bit staged or managed or, you know, purport to be a silver bullet, it's probably more like exercise. So you've got to do that 2 or 3 times a week. It's quite hard work. You won't always want to. I think that probably takes you closer to the truth.
And maybe some of the examples we were thinking of that couples therapists say to couples to do are more like things that you could do once, twice a week. So it might be pursue an interest together, like the dance class. It might be share a bath together once a week or something like that. That often comes up in
Yeah.
kind of couples therapy books or exercises. This idea that sharing intimate time together and proactively carving out that time in your diaries every week for each other might get the juices flowing a bit between.
Yeah, and you've got to get that right, haven't you, for the couple and for the person. You know, we sit here. I'm 6'2". You're the only man in England who's taller than me that I see on a regular basis. The idea of, you know, us two in a bath with our partner is just I mean,
Well, you're going somewhere else then, Matt.
Oh, the two of us in a bath. I think either way it feels preposterous, doesn't it? It's not really, that wouldn't work for me. I think that's my sort of check on those things. Like, I think about what you would make of it if I was making a suggestion like that to another couple. I think about what the friends I grew up with, you know, what the dads on the touchline would make of that kind of advice. And I think if it wouldn't connect with, you know, more than half of them,
what would they think, do you think? Well, to the idea of sharing a bath with their wife?
I think on a holiday, in a
Yeah.
massive, massive bath with a view overlooking a thing or something like that, then I could see that happening, right? Those can be like lovely moments, can't they? I can think of things like that sort of come to my mind with my wife, but it's not something that I think they would do every week, or that it would have any meaning if they did it every week. Just
What,
doesn't
what
it
what do
feel.
you think about the shared interest though? The dance class, the advice to the golf widow to take up golf with their
Yeah.
golf partner. What
Yeah,
what
it's good
what
up
do
to a point, isn't it? That advice. I mean, I'd be interested to know what you think. I suspect we probably think the same on this. I think it's okay up to a point, shared interest, right? But I think if he loves golf, like let's go with this stereotypical example, he loves golf. Well, why get involved in that? Like that's your time, isn't it, to go do something else with your mates or pursue your hobby or do your thing or just have the house to your self, which in a busy kind of family life in the rush hour of your life can be quite a nice thing in and of itself. So I think unless you've got an interest in golf, like why do that? And let's be honest about it, it might be a bit of relaxation time away from family life for him. That might be what some of the um pleasure is. I don't know. What do you think? Am I being a bit too I'm not, I don't feel like I'm being terribly romantic when I say those things.
I think shared interests work where they're genuine shared interests. I think is the point,
Right.
isn't it? That I'm thinking as of a couple in our extended family who dance together, right?
Yeah.
They do kind of a ballroom
Yeah.
dancing type thing together, which is their thing as a couple. They have a friendship group, a shared friendship group that they really enjoy together. They travel they travel around Canada in this example together to go to various dance competitions. And they love that, but they found that together. It wasn't one person kind of coming into that world. It was them finding that world together. And I think the vast majority of men, for example, who play football at the weekend or who play golf at the weekend probably don't want their partner coming into that space. They might be well open to having a conversation about, okay, what Tuesday night, Thursday night, is
Yeah.
there something we can do together?
Yeah.
But no, I think generally, unless it's a properly shared interest, I'd advise a couple to protect those individual spaces and to create a bit of mystery and individuality within the relationship.
Is it different for the younger generation? I'm just wondering, and like your response to that. I was thinking of a young
Yeah,
guy I was with recently, and he's so familiar with his friends, so comfortable with them, and they tell each other they love one another. They'll embrace goodbye. They're really free and easy with their emotions, and that definitely wouldn't have been how I was with my friends all those years ago, and that it feels like there's a generational shift on those things. I wonder whether the younger generation of couples do want to be more entwined or do want to give
yeah,
themselves over
maybe.
more shared activity.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed that wouldn't have happened in my childhood or adolescence. I don't think I play five-side football with other dads on a Monday night around where I live, and there's some younger guys that play on the courts near us. They're probably in their kind of late teens, early 20s. Loads of their girlfriends show up to watch them on a Monday
Yeah.
night, and
Yeah.
it's not something that would have happened for me when I was 20, 21. I would not have wanted my girlfriend to show up to
Yeah.
that court. I would have seen that as something I do with my mates that's completely separate from my relationship. So you might well be on something there.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. The other really humdrum bit of advice that gets given out all the time is to prioritize date nights, particularly when people are sort of stepping into family life. They've just maybe had children, they've got little babies, they've got youngsters, getting out together, doing that kind of regular thing. And I think we sort of agree and disagree on this one, don't we? I think I found that to be valuable in my life, and my wife and I are quite religious about date night. We always do it, although um, it's not always a massively romantic activity. It could just as easily be a walk out, and we might like grab last orders or
I've,
something
I've
like
seen a photo of you on date night at Freud's house in North
that.
London. So,
Yeah, yeah.
whether that counts as a romantic evening or not, I think is open to question.
Freud's house is in Hampstead for anybody who doesn't know, which is where we tend to go out and walk, and we do often find ourselves passing Freud's house. You're quite right. So that's the level level of romance. I think of date night and a kind of long, lingering 3-course meal and possibly candlelight or low light. It's quite an intense and difficult thing to do if you're in a stressful week. The time that's required, sometimes it strains the budget, and it's putting you, very close to one another with no other entertainment or distraction around, and you've got to talk for that time. When couples are in crisis or in difficulty or fed up with one another, wondering about the future of the relationship, it doesn't always feel like great advice. That wouldn't be what I would tell a couple in that kind of situation to go away and do. In fact, I'm often saying, maybe don't get into this, don't discuss it. It keeps going wrong for you guys. Hold, like, plan to be polite to one another for the next 5-7 days and come back and we'll do this again. In the end, of course, they're going to need to be able to talk to themselves and find strategies to do that. But the idea, when they're in that kind of crisis point or they're struggling, to go sit together for an hour and a half, 2 hours, feels naive at best.
Yeah, and probably quite harmful to their relationship in certain situations. Like you're saying, if they can't be civil to one another in day-to-day life, why on earth would they be pleasant, compassionate, interested in each other across a romantic table? I'm thinking also of the couple that I just, for practical, logistical, financial reasons, it's just not possible with young children to have regular date nights. And there might still be a kernel of really useful advice for them within that date night idea of, well, are you genuinely still finding these little pockets of time to connect with each other? Or are you strangers passing by each other in the night, just exchanging babies, exchanging household tasks, which I think a lot of couples do fall into that trap of. Our relationship has become a set of conversations about housework and about childcare. I think there is something that's really useful within that idea of just carving out and proactively taking care of the relationship.
Yeah, one of the things that I sometimes talk to couples about is whether there was anything that they, used to enjoy that they don't do anymore because of family life. And sometimes they'll say something like, "Oh, we always used to go tenpin bowling on Friday." It would be a stupid thing, something little and low key, and that can then reconnect you, right? That'd be quite a cute thing to do, to take a trip down memory lane, relatively inexpensive, easy to organize, and a bit of an activity that doesn't require you to be face to face talking intently about your feelings. Those things sometimes fit the bill better for those moments of connection, because I think you're right. I mean, they're really important. It's what the eye-gazing activity is aiming at. We just don't think it gets there, right? The intention to be connected to your partner, to understand them better, to be empathetic, to be available to them, to share a degree of vulnerability, broadly good things, right?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of these ideas, and maybe we can draw on this in another conversation, another point, but let's touch on it for a moment here. Go down a certain kind of philosophical route of everything should be talked about, everything should be open, everything should be engaged with, everything should be confronted. That I certainly want to kind of challenge in these conversations and help people understand when it's good to lean into a conversation, when it might be best to have a bit of privacy, own your own feelings and not talk about them and not engage with them. And I certainly think when it comes to couples who are in crisis mode, I think, like what you were talking about earlier, some of the focus on just be nice to each other for a while and see how that goes, rather than trying to find anything more extreme than that, is usually the best place to start.
Yeah, one of the sort of craziest bits of advice that I'd heard given to a couple was that they would create a kind of mood board, a vision board for the relationship, that they would share their hopes and aspirations and all of that kind of sort of taking that idea, I suppose, what you're talking about, complete transparency, complete togetherness, sharedness. Like that kind of craft project would just not appeal to me. It wouldn't appeal to a lot of the guys.
So it would literally be the idea of kind of cutting stuff out from magazines and putting it onto like a kind of
You've never seen one of those kind of big boards. So it's exactly that, but it's a shared endeavor, a joint thing. You could do it electronically or in the real world, and you would be doing it through the frame of your relationship. And that to me feels a bit all encompassing, a bit intense, a bit like what you're describing there. That's sort of the relationship is everything to you, that you're completely transparent with one another and there's no kind of room for your private life. And I think we would agree that is unrealistic and it's too much, huh?
Yeah, I can imagine a situation where it might be useful if a couple are feeling like their lives are going in different directions and they need to try and work out what they do share in common, and what the bigger picture might be one they're both working towards, even if day-to-day life feels like they're going off in different directions, could potentially be helpful. But
Yeah.
so much of what we're talking about today feels like it's dependent on the individual personalities of those in the room, in the couple themselves. Like,
Yeah.
you and I might feel like cutting things out of a magazine and sticking them on a board feels awful. I
Yeah.
can well imagine couples I've worked with who they'd lap that up. They'd think that that was a great idea and would really quite enjoy doing that together.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see that too. And, you know, couples spring to mind as you're saying that. So I think with all of these things, not necessarily disparaging them, but they're
Yeah,
sometimes given out as if they are the only ideas, or as if
exactly.
a relationship must conform to this way of being. And I think some of the more sane voices, like for me, like Esther Perel, is quite good on distance and separation as well. So she does also recommend taking a bath together, and she does talk a lot about eroticism and intimacy and desire and all of that. And sometimes it's a bit dialed up for my taste. You know, it's not what would connect with me necessarily. But I think she gets it right when she talks about spending time apart, pursuing individual interests, you know, in order to maintain that bit of curiosity about one another that you were touching on earlier. And then, you know, just some realistic rituals. Maybe you take coffee together in the morning, or you do that on a Friday morning, or, you know, those kind of ideas. Regularly expressing your appreciation for somebody, I think, could work. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that that could work. That I think is a necessary component of any relationship. But maybe writing a love letter each week takes that idea a bit too far. I think we're trying to highlight that what's being got at by those ideas of vision boards or staring into eyes or love letters, you can get to in a more ordinary way, in a way that respects like each other's need for personal space and need for friendships that are outside of the couple.
Let's maybe unpack a little bit more before we finish some of those realistic rituals. I think some of those ideas might have got lost in that last kind of bit of the conversation, but I think there's some really helpful and useful ideas for couples when thinking, okay, well, date nights and shared baths and things like that are off our agenda, but something a little bit more realistic, like for an hour on a Monday morning, we go for a walk together. For an hour on a Thursday morning, once the kids are in school, we're going to try to make sure we have a cup of coffee together. Things like that. Other examples you've used or you've heard of?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that sort of date night could be. It doesn't have to be romance, does it? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be long, lingering, expensive meal. Could be 10-pin bowling, for example. You know, could be like we stay home and we, I don't know, make a pizza together or something. You know, that kind of more simple. I guess more prosaic ideas. I quite like. My wife and I usually, I sometimes work into the evenings, but we'll almost always have a cup of tea and watch something on you know, Netflix together before the evening concludes. It's not like
Yeah.
hugely romantic, but it's a moment of connection, a bit of, you know, something that we're sharing. I think that does do something to the relationship, rather than we just drift off to bed. Or sometimes, you know, couples drift off to separate living arrangements because of childcare or because they're getting up differently in the morning. You can find those days roll into weeks, roll into months, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we were talking about before we pressed record was around the difference between those people who want to talk about their days and who don't. And I think
Yeah.
there's an assumption that couples should always talk about their days, that's a means from which all couples should connect romantically, is understanding the real detail of what someone's day has been like. And for both of us, I think that doesn't quite ring true. That we know people and have worked with people, and maybe there's an element of that within both of us. Certainly, I resonate with it a bit. That there are days when I've been that busy that the way I want to connect with my wife would be to just have a quiet time where you're not talking necessarily, you're just kind of hanging out together, and that can be lovely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all encompassing, isn't it? That advice. I suppose it's what you were saying earlier about this, almost the philosophy of that advice is that you should open up, and if you don't open up, you're deficient in some way. And typically that would be the guy, you know. But when I talk to guys about that, and I hear that complaint from their wives and partners that they don't open up, they don't tell them about their day, that they have got reasons for that. They've had like quite a stressful day, or they just don't want to relive it for whatever reason. They haven't found it particularly edifying first time round. They don't want to dissect it or do post-match analysis. But then when you put them on the spot for what they would like to do, they are happy to do a meal together, or to, you know, put the kids through the bath, or something. You know, they're happy to play their part in family life or the life of the partnership. But it would be a film, or it would be something that they did together, rather than rehashing the day.
And what would you say to that couple if the other partner's coming back and saying, yeah, but I want to know, like, I want this, it's important to me to know about the people that you work with, is a kind of classic example
It's
here.
compromise. It's compromise, isn't it? I think, like, so I think there's give and take on that. I think in that example, like, one partner needs to understand that the other one is not very keen on doing it, and the other partner needs to understand that the other person values it, and there is some meeting in the middle or taking turns with that. With that example of the husband who's playing golf, well, maybe when they go on the family holiday, he can go and have a round or two of golf, right? Maybe 2 of the mornings he can go play golf, you know, and then the other 2 mornings he's getting up and taking the kids to the pool, and she's doing her thing. But there's loads of time for family meals, and, you know, maybe there's a babysitter partway through the week or on the last night. Those things I think can be talked about. I would really like it if I could find some time to do this, you know, and then the other person can respond and say, oh, I was hoping we'd spend like loads of time together. And then, like, what does loads of time mean? Does that mean he can't do that? Does that mean she's going to be really unhappy in that instance? Or is that actually really fine? I find that when couples are at their best, it's not one person saying they want to spend the whole of the weekend golfing, or they never want to do a particular activity. It's more like we've ended up kind of clashing on it, and it's become like, you know, at both parties digging in, rather than just thinking about, okay, how do we trade on this, how do we compromise, how do we take turns? In the end, you know, partnership is that, isn't it? In any situation, there's only a number of strategies available to you. Are you compromising? Are you rolling over? Are you trading on it? Are you negotiating? Are you know?
Yep. Yeah, we often find our way back there, don't we, to the kind of middle place, and to the idea of compromise, the idea of negotiation. But
yeah, but I think it's baked into a relationship, isn't it? I think compromise is almost like, well,
yeah. I guess I'm just conscious that it's easier said than done, and I think there's scope for us to explore in future conversations, kind of what happens when that doesn't happen. What happens when someone in the relationship is digging in a bit more than the other person? How do you get through that? How do you negotiate that? How do you create space for yourself with someone who does want to take the entire weekends playing sport and has done that from the age of 15, and gets in a relationship with someone and says, well, this is my life, I'm not going to change, I want to be with you, but I'm not going to give up my Saturdays because that's when I play football?
Exactly. I think you're right. That's it's a separate topic, isn't it? Because how you manage those kind of disagreements constructively, I think, is a skill set. I think it's a skill set lots of couples don't have. It's taken me a long while to feel confident to be able to say what I want, or to be able to respond to the person I'm with and say, oh, that's not really going to work for me. Can we talk that through? And to do that in a reasonable way that stands up for my point of view, but doesn't ride roughshod over what they want. So I think some of my objection to these tools is when I see couples, it's like they need to know how to work through a problem, rather than they need a dance class together. You know, the answer to their problem is not date night, where they probably rerun an argument. It's like, okay, why is this argument happening? Are we committed to doing something differently? If we were committed to do something differently, what would it look like? Are these ideas any use to you? Can you start to practice them now? Can you hear yourself saying these things? Can you, you know, can you do it differently? Can you get to a better place?
Is there one of the examples we've talked about that really rubs you up the wrong way, that you just think, God, not only would I never do this myself, I just think is bad advice for most couples?
I guess this sort of idea that you never sleep on an argument, you'd never take a time out, you know. So I think it's really annoying when the other person walks out and you walks away from something when you're in the middle of it. But that is different from saying, look, I'm not in a position where I can talk about this now. I'm so fed up, or I'm so grumpy about this, or I feel so let down, you know. And in those moments, I think a timeout's really useful. And, you know, if you've got the ability to sleep in separate rooms, sometimes that's what will diffuse it, you know, let cooler heads prevail, pick it up in the morning. So I think that kind of, you've always got to talk it out. I hear couples who are up until, you know, 2:30 a.m. screaming at one another or just going over it in an emotionally really fraught way. And I'm like, just can that, even if you don't get a great night's sleep and you're a bit dysregulated in your emotions wise, you're still going to do better on that bit of sleep and then trying the next day rather than having all that. They often don't get there anyway, of course, you know, it ends through exhaustion or somebody flouncing off. It's not like they've stayed up till 2:30 a.m. and resolved it.
That was going to be my one as well, annoyingly. Never sleep on an argument. Terrible advice, I think. I think there's definitely arguments you shouldn't sleep on, but more often than not, I think cooler heads prevail. And
You're
one
going
of
to
the
argue, aren't you, as well?
yeah, exactly. One of the things that the Gottman say about that I think is spot on, that you alluded to, is walking out is not good. Walking out disrespects the other person. It leaves them with all their feelings. So to give the other person some, or to agree together some time frame for coming back to it, that's good advice. I think just saying, okay, I'm not in a position where I can talk to you about this right now. Let's try again tomorrow, or let's try again on Wednesday when we both know that the kids are out and we can properly sit down and talk about this. Otherwise, it just leaves the other person feeling unheard, disregarded, whatever it might be.
Yeah, walking out is disrespectful, isn't it? It's dramatic.
Yeah.
Saying we call time on this, like I'm not, you know, I'm not doing well here. This is not working for me. We do need to talk about this. We absolutely do, but now's not the right time or place because the kids are upstairs, because I've got to be up at, you know, 9 a.m. a board meeting, whatever the thing is in the, you know, it can be, I think couples think it will be a disaster, but you can hold until the morning, you can hold until lunchtime when you can step away from the desk and you can do a call, or it will wait until that evening. It really will. And you can do that in a respectful way. That's sort of part of how to manage the conflict, isn't it? The person is asking for what they need. The other person is like, well, I would rather talk about it now, but okay, you've asked for something. It is reasonable. I can give it. I will give it. You're, you know, maybe 50% even, you know, on the way to resolving conflict generally, just with those principles in place.
Good. I'm gonna go away and put some nice lavender bath salts in my bath and have a bath.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I'm going to go away and practice all those things we talked about, and just check that I do them perfectly and all the time with my wife. I'm pretty certain I do, but
Good. And do your weekly visit to the Freud Museum. Enjoy.
yeah.
All right. Good to see you, Matt.
Yeah, take care, Graham. Bye.